Thanks, Julian. Thanks for the opportunity to come along to, I think, the best mining club in Australia for this kind of thing. I'd like to acknowledge Mayor Brendan Vanstone, an outstanding advocate for his community, as you've just seen, and also Trevor Sykes, who's the patron of this club, but is also a member of a very important group in South Australia called the South Australian Expert Group, and they are a group of people who have either ex-South Australians or a connection with South Australia who advocate for South Australia around the world. And it's people like Trevor, Hugh Morgan, Leon Davis, Owen Hegarty, and people of that calibre. And so they're our kind of secret weapon for South Australia to tell the story. And I hope to enlist there's quite a few friends here from my time in working in Pico and North at North Parks in central New South Wales. So I hope to enlist a few more of you before the end of the session. So I'm now going to synchronise my things here, so we'll see how we go. So I just wanted to give you sort of an overview, a sort of bigger picture for South Australia, talk about New Star, talk about Arium, and talk about some of the other initiatives that the South Australian government's going through. This graph sort of shows production for minerals and oil and gas over the recent times. You can see the trend is heading in the right direction. The green down the bottom is copper. The red is iron ore. So we're sort of, an re-emerging iron ore province, principally coming out of Arium. This is a graph of exploration expenditure, which is sort of kind of a lead indicator for the health of the place. Red is minerals, blue is oil and gas. And you see on the red side, we were bumping along bottom for quite some time, kicked up in about 2004-05 as a result of commodity prices going up, some government initiatives that sort of kicked in about that stage called the PACE plan. The drill out of Olympic Dam happened around that time. So South Australia got re-rated at that stage. We hit the GFC and then bounced back up again. And I think we're still, as an industry, the minerals industry at least, is sort of seeing the ripple effect of the GFC. So as we all know, risk capital for exploration right now is very tight, and we're following the same trend as the rest of Australia. But conversely, the oil and gas guys are doing gangbusters, and you can see the blue there. I think 350 odd million this year in exploration, primarily in oil in the Cooper Basin. The success rate up there is something like 50%. So for every second hole, you get a minimum field size, which is about $300 million worth of oil. So for 30 odd million, you get $300 million back. So those boys are doing extremely well right now. So this is a map of South Australia GTM, just sort of getting you in location. And what I've tried to do here is just sort of illustrate the various plays, if you like, that are going on, creating a bit of a Venn diagram over the top of Port Pirie, Whyalla and Port Augusta. On the left-hand side, we've got Iluka, who've got a world-class, the world's richest zircon deposits out just north of Ceduna. We've got the Eyre Peninsula with a number of iron ore projects, both hematite and magnetite, quite a very large one, billions of tonnes now. We've got the Prominent Hill, Roxby Downs, CARRAPATEINA hillside corridor as part of the Olympic Dam, and we've also got the Braemar iron ore province over near Broken Hill with links back into the upper Spencer Gulf. But the point of this is to say, well, look, there's an awful lot going on, both from a mineral prospectivity and development point of view, but also all roads lead to these three cities in the upper Spencer Gulf. Just a bit closer up, you can see the number of projects and prospects that are going on in South Australia, ranging from graphite deposits on the Eyre Peninsula, copper gold deposits in the north, uranium deposits in the east. So we now have 22 permitted mines in South Australia and about 30 odd projects which are working their way through the approval systems. We've actually got 5 mine lease applications sitting on the desk right at the minute. So we're sort of seeing the end stage of it, probably a 20-year program starting with Ross Varden back in the mid-90s, and we're just now starting to see the long-term strategy starting to bear fruit. But the point is, again, it all converges on the upper Spencer Gulf, of which Port Pirie is a major part. So I'm going to talk about the copper part of this, and I'll just touch on the others just to sort of build the story up a bit. Olympic Dam's been in the press in the last couple of days. If you look at that pie chart there, it's the economic demonstrated resources for copper in Australia. And you can see Olympic Dam sort of just swamps everybody else. Mount Isa, even Cadia are sort of small slices of the pie compared to what's at Olympic Dam itself. And they haven't found the bottom and they haven't found the sides yet, so there's more to be found there. Right now, Olympic Dam are going through a debottlenecking phase. So what they want to do is get from 180,000 tonnes of copper up to 230 in the next year or so. And as you would have seen in the press yesterday, they've announced they're seeking approval for a pilot study looking at heap leaching up there. And the idea, and they've been working on this for about 6 or 7 years, the idea is to do what is conventional heap leaching is used all over the world for copper, but use it for uranium and copper as well. And they've had extraordinary technical success with this so far. And the idea is to cut out a large chunk of the expensive bit of their processing plant and put the heap leaching circuit on the front. They take virtually all the uranium out and some of the copper, and then they reclaim it and put it back through the mill, and they can save a lot on capex by doing that. So the idea is to get the permits in place, which we don't think there's any particular problem there, and then I think in 2015 they'll be seeking a commencement and spending in the order of $200 or $300 million doing it. So it's a big step forward and a big step, I think, to show confidence in the project. So the combination of debottlenecking it, which will make it the 5th biggest producer of copper in the world, plus this augurs well for a larger expansion later on. In terms of, but this Olympic Dam's not on its own. We've got Prominent Hill, 100 km to the north. This is a picture over the top of it. This was one that was found, I think it was about in 2000. It was in production 5 years later. We actually permitted this mine from beginning to end in 5 months. And we're very proud of that record. Now, we're working with a great company who really work with us, but that's what you can, if you've got a company who's well-resourced and knows what they're doing, we can do things as a government very, very quickly. Further to the south, they've got CARRAPATEINA and a number of other projects. So you can see on the bottom left-hand side, Cam Sin, Fremantle, Doctor. These are all projects which have either got all grade intersections in them, and they announced a maiden resource for Cam Sin, I think a few months ago, a couple of 100 million tonnes at 0.6. And then they've got CARRAPATEINA itself, which you can see that's grown from 200 million tonnes to now 800 million tonnes. And again, there's another one where they haven't found the bottom yet. And we expect to get the mine lease approval for this one in the next month or so. So on the copper side, things are humming along quite nicely. And whilst I haven't got a slide here, of course, but Hillside's been in the paper, at least in South Australia, quite a bit. I, as the Director of Mines, approved it last Friday, and I'm very proud to have been part of the team that's approved this. This is actually quite a big mine that's going ahead, but it has got the challenge of being close to the coast. It's in a farming community, and so we're really bumping up against all the community issues that we're seeing all through New South Wales, certainly in Queensland, and we're right in the middle of it in South Australia right now. There's going to be a protest on Saturday about it, sort of combining the guys who are anti-fracking with the guys who are sort of anti-mining. And we're working our way through it. I think we're probably ahead on points at the moment, but it's an extraordinary sort of situation to find yourself in, where this is a $1 billion investment these guys are making. It'll employ 600 people through the life of it. It's got a 15-year mine life currently, but it will go for a lot longer than that because there's lots of resources that haven't converted into reserves. So, but we do end up with a strange situation where we've got a handful of people who are really anti it, but we've got the Aboriginal groups that have native title down there supporting it. So there's not something wrong with this picture, I've got to say. There's no doubt this project will go ahead. It is heavily regulated, the toughest regulations we've ever put on any mine on this particular project because of the proximity of people and farms and everything else. But we think we've got the balance right, and we think the South Australian government has got a multi-land use policy which says don't sterilise things, actually work your way through it. There will be some times when perhaps a mine or a wind farm can't go ahead because there's just too many conflicting things, but don't start there. Start from the premise that everything can coexist and you can work it out. And we're pretty pleased from a government point of view that we've got this pretty... Now, just talk about Neostar. I guess from a government angle, I'm going to have to write a book about this one because it's had so many twists and turns and it's getting to where we are now. But it started out with Neostar coming to government saying, well, EPA this is a 120-year site, so it was well overdue for an upgrade anyway. EPA saying to Neostar, well, you've got to improve your environmental performance, and really the only choice was rebuild it or knock it down. Now, Neostar had been in a position of expanding their mining portfolio, so the gearing ratio didn't allow them to do it at this particular time. So they came back to both state and federal governments and said, well, we know we have to do it, but we haven't got the balance sheet to do it. Can you help? Now, from a state government point of view, it was kind of help these guys out or catastrophic failure. Really wasn't much of a choice at the end of the day. But we went through a whole series of combinations and permutations to get to the end point. The federal government were initially in, then they were out, then they were back in again. But I've got to say, where we ended up was the state sort of taking it pretty much all on the chin, underwriting part of the financial arrangement. We've sorted out a regulatory certainty for them so that for 10 years, once the EPA sets the lead and air, which is one of the main criteria, once they've set it, they can't change it again. Only Parliament can change it. And I think just as important, Neostar and the government are investing $50 million in what we call the targeted lead abatement program, which will clean up the rest. So we've sorted out the smelter, so it's not dumping lead dumping lead anymore, but we've still got the residual material to take care of. So over a 10-year program, we'll progressively clean things up, get kids that are perhaps in harm's way out of the way, and make sure that the lead in blood for particularly young kids gets back to a sort of normal level. So as a combination, I think it's a really inventive and a fantastic partnership between industry and the community and government. Couldn't have happened without leadership both from the community. I can remember fronting up in Brendan's community hall there, talking about the process and being a bit nervous, thinking, well, lead and blood, this is a very emotive issue. But the community were absolutely on song. So, look, just what the hell are you talking about? Get on with it fast was the message we got back. And it was very powerful for government to hear that because it sort of built your resilience. So, right, well, there's challenges coming in all directions, but we've got to make this thing work. And so all these things had to come into play. And the other thing I have to say, this is where the Premier really showed leadership because at various stages, Neostar were about to walk, or we had to up the ante considerably, and he did not blink. Every time we came back, said, "Well, sorry, Premier, we've just added another $100 million onto the." He did not blink, and we just sort of marched on and did the deal. So it says a lot about him. It says a lot about the government sort of taking on, a risky proposition for a government to take on, but we end up with a smelter which will last for 30 years. It's state of the art. When you go and see these sorts of smelters overseas, it's like you're in a university. They don't look like an industrial complex at all. They're incredible what they can do. We remove the sinter plant, which is the thing that's the archaic thing, which sort of produces most of the lead, and we upgrade a lot of the other infrastructure around there as well. The business case for this thing is outstanding, and the genius of it from a Neostar point of view is that this project becomes what was an add-on to a larger smelter strategy now becomes central to the whole thing because Neostar have got 7 or 8 zinc smelters around the world. They'll produce a residue from all of those. All of that will come back to Port Pirie and allows them to extract all the metals, all the gold, the rare earths, the trace elements that are actually of value to it with huge margins on it. So the rate of return on this investment is just outstanding, and it goes for 30 plus years. So it's a fantastic outcome for Port Pirie and certainly for South Australia. Where are we? Okay, keep going. I won't go into this in detail, but basically it's a $500 million deal. It's a complex, it's actually quite a complex financial package involving silver forward loans, special purpose vehicles that act as the investor into the project, because Neostar couldn't actually handle it on its own balance sheet, so we had to create a separate equity style arrangement, which then led to all sorts of complexities around how do you lay off the risk in something like this. So if anybody's interested, I can having read and gone through endless legal documents, I know far more about these things than I ever really wanted to know. But at the end of the day, we got where we needed to go. So that brings us back to the Upper Spencer Gulf, and it's clear Port Pirie has a great future. Brendan showed you the slide about the port options there. I just want to touch on Whyalla, because Whyalla has similarly gone through a similar renaissance. We established an indenture for them a few years ago, and they've invested over $1 billion in upgrading their plant. So the steelworks now operates with magnetite rather than hematite. They're exporting the hematite. They're heading towards 15 million tonnes per annum of iron ore now, and expanding out of the Middlebacks, and also projects in the north of the state. Okay, what's happened there? Discussions around expanding the port even further, potentially for third-party access. So as part of all that, because all roads lead to that Upper Spencer Gulf, the government has done a number of reports on infrastructure needs in South Australia, and it's set up this thing called the Resources Infrastructure Task Force to look at how do you, if you look at the state as a whole, how do you increase the NPV of all these projects? How do you make them all work? How do you get people to collaborate? If government is going to put money on the table, where's the best place to put it? And so we've created the Olympic Dam Task Force, which I look after, is now going to look after this particular task. And the idea is to come up with a port solution for all the projects up in that direction in the next year or so. So it's quite a challenge. We've established a task force. We're talking to companies. We're reviewing the infrastructure knowledge we've got, and we're starting to sharpen our focus on what some of the outcomes will be. And given that you've got a federal government who wants to be the infrastructure government and is looking at capital recycling, there's some options here that we're now very actively pursuing. One of the other things we're doing too, and this is the Premier's vision, is saying, well, when Olympic Dam, when the decision was made not to go ahead with Olympic Dam, he said to BHP, well, you've got to invest in whatever it's going to take to get you to the next stage. And so what he managed to get out of BHP was a $10 million fund, which has been matched by the state government, to set up what we call a Mining and Petroleum Services Centre of Excellence. The idea being that when Olympic Dam hits again, we want the service sector to be ready for it. So we want to do whatever training, whatever research, whatever capability building has got to happen, we want to do it so that when they are going to be ready when this expansion happens. So what we've done is to set up a committee, which is a sort of cross-section through the oil and gas, mining sector and services sector, and people will come to us with projects particularly where the service sector can play a role. We vet it, and then a whole series of projects come out of it, and there may be bids for cooperative research centres with universities, there might be business cases, there might be pilot studies, and the idea is to get as many projects as we can up and running with the service sector involved. We're sort of running it a bit like exploration and mining. We want to get as many projects in the bottom of the triangle as we possibly can, with the idea that a few will make it through the process and develop a business case that can be commercialised. The idea that the criteria for funding is up there, so it's really basic. building on comparative advantage, having industry being, industry support and industry pull, have a material impact in South Australia, solve problems that perhaps individual companies can't do by themselves, be collaborative and be publicly reportable down the track. And some of the projects that we've funded so far is that we've created an onshore petroleum and oil and gas training hub at Tonsley Park, which is the old Mitsubishi site. This is to train people ready for the unconventional gas revolution that's coming to South Australia. We've done Australia's first comprehensive ICT roadmap for oil and gas and mining for the ICT sector in conjunction with the AIIA. We're looking at Brakunga, which is that picture down the bottom, which is an old pyrite mine the government owns, turning that into an operational mining training centre. We're setting up open access remote operating centres so that at the moment, if you want to get into remote operating, you tend to have to lock into the big supply chains. Well, we want to set up an open access one where anybody can dive in, view their particular bit of kit on a processing plant, invent their own applications for it, and this one's getting quite a lot of legs. Chair in geostatistics and big data, essentially. We're setting up a professorship in unconventional gas because one of the big challenges in South Australia, our cost structure is still too high, so we need to be able to get down the cost curve fast, and geomechanics and the peculiar geology, I guess, of Australia needs to be sorted out in order to do that. And we've also set up we've managed to get about $7 or $8 million out of the federal government for a copper uranium transformation hub, because one of the issues in South Australia is most of the copper deposits have some level of uranium in them. BHP solve it by having a smelter, but other projects won't have enough uranium to justify, or enough value to justify that. So how do we get the uranium and the daughter minerals out so that you can sell a clean copper concentrate? So it's a problem that's pretty important for South Australia, but many other deposits around the world have the same problem. And finally, what is a very, very tough budget this year, we managed to convince the Treasurer, who also happens to be the Mines Minister, to give us a core library. So that's a picture of our new core library at Tonsley Park. Those of you who've worked in South Australia would know that the core library we have at Glenside is probably one of the best in Australia, and the team that work there are outstanding, but it's been full for the last couple of years, so we needed to expand. So we've now got a $30 million facility which will be all singing, all dancing, have all the scanners and all the gear that you're ever going to want. Because I think as we all know, core and samples of any sort are highly valuable. It's going to get tougher and tougher with land access, so that the core that we retain is going to get more and more valuable over time. And this becomes part of an oil and gas and minerals hub in the Tonsley Park area, so we're very excited by this. And I think, I guess to cap off here, I'm now part of the Department for State Development, which is a merging of a variety of departments. I'll put this up here for people who are actually going to come to South Australia and come and pay us a visit. Don Russell is our new CEO. He starts on Monday, and I just thought it was worth putting it up here because Don is a bit of a rock superstar in federal circles. He used to be Keating's primary economics advisor through the whole Keating reformation. He's ambassador in the US for a couple of years and done a bunch of other things, and so he's coming to little old South Australia to stir us up. So I think he'll be a big fish in a small pond, but we're looking forward to him turning up and seeing what he can do. So thanks very much for paying attention to us. Sure.